Good morning, everyone, from the sparkling Swan to the city streets of Perth. Welcome again to the City of Perth Parade and commemorative service on ABC television. We've had to wait 2 years for the parade's return. As you know, of course, it had to be cancelled due to COVID protocols in 2020 and 2021. But this integral part of this hallowed day is back. A chance for people of all ages to say thanks and to reflect this most revered day in the nation. Clint Wilden with you in commentary this morning. My privilege again to be part of the Anzac Day City of Perth Parade and commemorative service. Welcome to wherever you're watching. I'm fortunate to have two people alongside me to help guide us through the stories of the veterans, their regiments, battalions, and we're shortly to see marching ahead of us. Military historian Steve Danaher is with us again. Good morning, Steve. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a long time, hasn't it, Clint? So it's wonderful to be back, and I really look forward to today. And it's fantastic to see participation on the streets.
And also joining us, Paul Salpietro, the current serving reservist member of the 1128. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Clint. How are we doing today, mate?
I'm very well. Terrific view down the terrace with the parade underway. The senior representatives of the Australian Defence Force stepping off from the corner of Barrack Street and St George's Terrace. They'll be followed by the WA Mounted Police, by vintage vehicles, military jeeps carrying veterans, the ex-services units, corps and regimental associations. Then the parade will proceed along St George's Terrace, past the saluting dais, before turning right into Victoria Avenue and dispersing around Langley Park. Steve, worth noting this march back on here in Perth, but there have been commemorations taking place in towns right around WA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we need to remember is there's about 530 different towns within the great state of Western Australia, covering the state's about 2.5 million square kilometres. And with those states, the towns, they're all doing their own thing this morning, whether that be a dawn service or their own march, etc. And we've got some places that are quite large. They'll have hundreds there today, whereas with other places there might only be a handful of members. And one of those places is Wildcatcham. Wildcatcham's in the wheat belt, about 195 k's east northeast of Perth. Population of just under 500 or thereabouts. And today they're missing one of their stalwarts, who's running a little bit ill at the moment, and he's at home in bed. He's normally pivotal in running the dawn service and the march, and has done for the last 50 odd years since his return from Vietnam. And that's Paul D. Pierre. These country towns, there are Pauls in all of these places. They're the unsung heroes that get organised, make things happen, and I salute to all the Pauls.
So the parade being started with 10 Australian national flags and 10 New Zealand national flags down the terrace. And we've seen the defence representatives as well behind the flags. There they are, from the Royal Australian Navy, the Army, and the RAAF.
So we've got the state president of the RSL, that's Mr. Duncan Anderson. He's recently taken over from Peter Aspinall. The Naval Association president, Mr. Ian Holthouse, and the RAF Association president, Clive Robertson, AM.
Worth noting the WA Police Mounted section.
Yeah, so the Police Mounted section, that's been in existence since 1834, and it has a current strength of around 18 officers. And these ceremonial duties only take up about 5% of their time. They're very busy, and as we can see, the horses are robust, and they need to be for crowd control, etc.
And it signifies an important part of the parade that police grant the permission of the civil authority to the military to march through the city.
Absolutely. The military are at the beck and call of the civil government as such, and of course the federal government, and that goes down to the police ensuring that the military don't run rampant and do as they wish.
So to the senior service, and there's a lot of them in their crisp white uniforms. There'll have to be a little bit of sidestepping there by the Royal Australian Navy band.
Absolutely.
Sidestep to the left.
Ah, yes, of course. There's always a calling card left behind. The Navy's led by Warrant Officer Jack Parnell, and Seaman Benjamin Schofield is the life ring holder today. Now, the Navy's broken up into different platoons. HMAS Stirling has platoons 1 through to 4, quite a large group. And Stirling's primary role is the administration and training and maintenance of the RAN assets that are on the Western Seaboard. There are around 12 fleet units, including Anzac-class frigates, Collin-class submarines, and of course all the submarine training aspect of that. They have an escape apparatus there where they practice their escape from submarines. Hopefully they'll never get to use it in real time. And HMAS Stirling is named after Captain Stirling. He arrived in 1827 and landed at Garden Island, and he came back in June in 1829 with the first European settlement for Western Australia. And what's interesting to note is it's the first free colony in Australia at the time.
On the dais, representing the Royal Australian Navy, both the Senior Australian Defence Force Officer in WA, Commodore Ivan Ingham, and also Captain Gary Lawton.
What's interesting is both those officers are ex-Royal Navy. Commodore Ingham served 21 years from seaman to warfare officer before joining the RAN December 2001. He's had various command appointments, including as commander of HMAS Perth between 2014 and 17. Captain Gary Lawton, he's been a submariner for his whole career, both in the Royal Navy and the RAN, and he assumed command of HMAS Stirling in 2020.
There's the Governor, and always good to see him, the Honourable Kim Beazley AC. The second time that he's been at a City of Perth parade. Had to, of course, with the rest of us, sit out the previous 2 years because of the COVID protocols. But yeah, the Honourable Kim Beazley, Governor of WA.
And here we see members of HMAS Stalwart. That's a supply class auxiliary oiler replenishment ship. And it's also used in disaster relief, combat against environmental pollution at sea. It provides logistic support for the armed forces and does support humanitarian and disaster relief operations, as I mentioned. And it's one of our newest ships. It came into service in late 2021.
So before then, from HMAS Stirling, personnel from a number of units from HMAS Stirling marching, platoons 1 to 5. Stirling's primary role to provide operational support, logistic support, trials and research facilities, training, personnel and maintenance support for the Royal Australian Navy ships, submarines and aircraft based in WA.
Yes, another ship that's marching today. We've got the Perth and the Toowoomba and the clearance diving team. So it's a fairly large contingent from the Navy, as you would expect. Garden Island is Fleet Base West, and it's the largest group outside of New South Wales.
Saw some personnel there from HMAS Toowoomba, the 7th of 8 Anzac class frigates in service with the Royal Australian Navy. Built in 2003, Toowoomba commissioned in 2005, has conducted multiple operational deployments. The Australian Army Perth and 16th Battalion Pipes and Drums, formed from the Cameron Highlanders of WA, dating back to 1936. Currently the ensemble has 10 Army Reserve soldiers. Their primary role is to provide support to the military for ceremonial and for training purposes.
Leading the Army contingent today is Headquarters 13th Brigade, led by the Commander Brigadier Brett Chandler, CSC, along with Deputy Commander Colonel Craig Madden and Regimental Sergeant Major Warrant Officer Class 1 David Muirty. The brigade is based at Irwin Barracks in Karrakatta and is the Australian Army's main footprint in Western Australia. Next in the order of march will be the Templar Horse Regiment, led today by the Commanding Officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Wright, along with his Regimental Sergeant Major, Warrant Officer Class 1 Chris Sharp. Geared on Hardy today consists of Ensign Warrant Officer Class 2 Barry Boddington, Senior Escort Sergeant Ryan Gray, and the Junior Escort today, Sergeant Brett Harax. Templar horse, of course, wear the well-known emu plumes in their slouch hats, very distinctive of Australian Armoured Corps units. Templar horse has a very rich history dating back to the Gallipoli campaign with the charge at the neck.
The story of the emu plumes going back to 1890 in Queensland is one of the great rich stories of Australian military history. There was downtime for the mounted infantry up in Queensland, so they would chase emus to prove their proficiency on the horses and try and pluck a feather from the emus and then put it in their hat, and that tradition has continued and remained ever since.
Absolutely right. Next up we have the 1128 Battalion, led today by Lieutenant Colonel Alistair Sparks, who recently took command of the battalion. With him today is the Regimental Sergeant Major Warrant Officer Class 1 Brad Foster, OAM CSM, a absolutely terrific bloke who recently was awarded the OAM for meritorious service to the Australian Army, and certainly a medal well earned. You will notice the battalion marches with two sets of colours, those being both the 11th and 28th battalions. The battalion itself has a rich history dating back to 1903, saw service in both World Wars, and in its current configuration was amalgamated in 1988 to form the 1128 Battalion Royal Australian Regiment. Many members of the battalion have served in operations overseas as far as the Middle East and peacekeeping operations in the Pacific, with members currently on deployment in Darwin and in Thursday Island.
So we see the RAAF is next in line, the Royal Australian Air Force, and this is something we missed last year. RAAF celebrated its 100th birthday. Now, the Australian Air Force was officially formed on the 31st of March 1921. It gained the prefix Royal, which was approved by King George V in June 21. And then it became officially known as the Royal Australian Air Force, or RAAF, on the 31st of August 1921. So happy belated birthday to the RAAF. RAF Base Pearce is the home of number 25 City of Perth Squadron, and it's responsible for the control and coordination of all base activities. It also homes the 2nd Flying Training School, 2 FTS, and it trains and graduates pilots to the highest possible standard, and they're using the new Pilatus PC-21. Also has 79 Squadron, and their role is to provide introductory jet aircraft training to RAAF pilots, and they use the BAE Hawk 127 training jet. 2 Expeditionary Health Squadron is the medical facility at Pearce, and we also have 253 Squadron Detachment at Pearce, air traffic controllers and such. It also homes the Republic of Singapore Air Force's 130 Squadron, and they also fly the PC-21.
That's the 7-wing Air Force Cadets Drum Corps.
We can see on the chests of many of the airmen and soldiers in there, and there's one coming along right now, that they've been extremely busy over the last 20-odd years and earned a great deal of decorations and awards for their operational service. Things are starting to quieten down a little bit for the forces, which is a good thing, but also they like to go away and prove that the training that they've done, it's a bit like playing the football match, isn't it? You know, everyone wants to play the grand final, and we do that, or they do that, I should say, by proving their training and such on operational deployments, humanitarian as well as disaster relief.
This is the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band, formed back in March 1892. It consisted then of 8 young bandsmen over 125 years plus. The band has never ceased to function, including during the war years, with most of the band enlisted in the Defence Forces. The band currently 40 members strong, with a range of ages and occupations.
Next up is the West Australian Great War Living History Association, donning original First World War uniforms. And on the left, I can see Bob Wise there giving the salute to the dais. Bob served as a Warrant Officer Class 2 for 30+ years in the Royal Australian Corps of Transport. And they look fantastic in their uniforms there. Real part of history, marching down the terrace.
Notice some nurses there as well, Paul?
Absolutely, yes. They, again, adorning their First World War era uniforms and yeah, certainly looking the part today.
And the photos that they're carrying behind them?
Yes, all Victoria Cross recipients. Going back from the Boer War to current times.
Yeah, I see Percy Grabwick, the Grabwick Club at Campbell Barracks, the OR's recreational facility is named after Percy. We see Ben Robert Smith, Fred Bell, VC for the Boer War, Throssell, 10th Light Horse, Starcevich won his second 43rd, won his VC in the Islands, so it goes on. And behind them we have Legacy. And leading the Legacy today, we have John Burridge, MG. He celebrates 50 years with Legacy as a legatee, and along with Brigadier Duncan Warren, who's down in Albany today. Peter Emmett, the president of Legacy, is organising and he's participating in a Cape to Cape charity walk, which started yesterday and finishes on the 1st of May. And retired cricketer Mitchell Johnson is the patron of the walk, and he's down there with them today doing in the hard yards. So it's never too late to donate to Legacy.
Yeah, such a tremendously important organisation. For over 80 years, it's dedicated itself to the welfare and support of widows and children of deceased war veterans, and will continue this vital role well into this century.
So here we go with the military vehicles, and we have a number of veterans in there today. In car number 4, we have Les Anderson from the Catering Corps. In car number 3, James Baker. Car number 4 is interesting when you see that. George Goldie is the passenger. George is 101 in October this year. Well done, George. He's being driven by his son, John. Car number 5, we have Aussie Quackik, I think that's the correct pronunciation. That's driven by John Otway, and he also has another passenger, Peter Lilly. And we can see a Vietnam veteran there with his distinctive MP red beret. Car number 7, driver is Neil Potter, and that contains some members of the Rhodesian forces that are travelling in that vehicle today. Car number 2 is a Model T 1917 Desert Patrol vehicle. That driver is Sean Curran, and we have in there Malcolm Stone and Barry Wansell. There's the Chevy Blitz, number 13, and Jim Sewell. And Jim Sewell is driving that big Chevy there at the moment. Oh, look at that fire engine. Fantastic looking vehicle that is. Just a little bit on George Goldie. George served World War II in the Australian Signal Corps. He was in the 4th Australian Beach Section of the 1st Australian Army Corps. And he's been a stalwart in the veteran vehicle clubs for many, many years. And it's good to see him on parade.
So into the veterans in the cars, plenty of them there, and a lot of fine work across the years, and it's nice to see that they can still take place. That's car 4. Rob Lyons, Montebello Islands during the atomic testing in 1956, was servicing the British fleet there. Driver today, Chris Lewis.
And in the big Nissan, we've got Graham McEwen. He's the driver. He's been doing this for many, many years. And his passengers today are Catherine Fowler. I also believe that Des Jennings might be in there as well. Des was in Transport Corps in World War II. In fact, he's 99 years young this year. He joined in December 1941, transferred to the AIF in July of 42. He served in Darwin during the bombings and then was sent to New Britain after that as a thank you.
Notice one thing missing from the cars this year is from previous marches is they would have the names of the veterans on the side just to assist the people in the crowd to recognise who was being driven along. There's the Governor on the dais. Worth mentioning before, by the way, taking the salute for the Navy was Captain Gary Lawton alongside Commodore Ivan Ingham AM, who we spoke about for the Army, Brigadier Brett Challoner, CSC, the commander of 13th Brigade, and you would have also seen with the RAAF, it was Wing Commander Paul Taylor, the commander 25, that's the City of Perth Squadron, taking the salute previously for the RAAF. That's the town of Victoria Park's band, their brass band in the bright red jackets. Terrific story with them as well. Asked to wear the insignia of the 460 Squadron, as for many years they marched alongside the RAAF 460 Squadron, and the squadron decided that to make sure that they would always have their insignia seen on Anzac Day, they asked the town of Victoria Park brass band to wear it on every Anzac Day parade, and they've continued to do that now for many years.
And following on, we have the Naval Association of WA. Their logo is once Navy, always Navy, and their passion in life is to make sure that naval types, both serving and retired, stay in touch with each other. And we have the RANS Association, led by Sue Hackett. She served between 1966 and 1973. Post-war RANS were from 1951 to 85, and they have 80 current members, and they celebrate. They've still got some World War II ladies there, and they age between 95 and 99. Fleet Air Arm Association was formed in February 1977. They flew fixed-wing aircraft. Mainly off, we remember the HMAS Sydney and the HMAS Melbourne. And they train all their crews, tradespeople and such, for all the maintenance of those aircraft and such. Served in Vietnam and Korea, and they also include the United States Army's 135th Assault Helicopter Flight, who actually served with the US Army, and they served in Vietnam between 1967 and 71. They were recently awarded a Unit Gallantry Citation.
Perth Metro Pipe Band there. One of the fastest growing competitive and performing pipe bands. As we continue to see a number of other banners, the N-class destroyers, of course.
Yes, N all stands, all that. They're all named with N names. We have the Napier, the Nizam, the Nestor, Norman and Nepal. The Nizam's interesting. It served in the Atlantic Ocean, but also lost 10 crew members off Cape Lewin on the 11th of February 1945 in very, very rough conditions.
Nepal, by the way, originally known as the Norseman before they changed its name.
Oh, okay. The flag banner bearers there today are Lawrence Clay and Jonathan Clay, and they're the grandsons of Bill Andrew from the Nepal.
Churchland Senior High School Band, established back in 1972, and then behind them you'll see the banner of the Royal Australian Navy Clearance Divers Association, established back in 1951. There it is. United and undaunted, their motto, and with good reason. One of the toughest jobs you could imagine. You could see where they've served: Malaysia, Vietnam, Kuwait, East Timor, Iraq, Afghanistan and Somalia.
Then we have the HMAS Sydney Association. There's been a number of Sydneys, of course. The first Sydney, World War I. There was the Sydney Emden action up at the Cocos Islands, and of course the tragedy of World War II when the Sydney was lost in action against the Cormoran in 1941, and just discovered not that many years ago. And of course they had an unknown sailor that was in a Clarey boat that was washed up on a beach somewhere in the Indian Ocean there, and he was identified only last year, I think it was, and he was a young seaman from who had enlisted in Sydney, and it was good that the family got to know, who he was, and he's been laid to rest appropriately.
Some of the Australian Navy cadets. And then behind them, you'll see you would have seen for a moment, the City of Perth band as we're into the racks. It's the Women's Royal Australian Army Corps. Yeah, formed in 1951 to cover the shortage of men in the Army. Disbanded in 1985 and then integrated into the Australian Defence Force of today.
Women have always been an integral part of the Defence Forces, doing a number of jobs. And in fact, these days they are doing jobs that were once exclusively for men. Times have changed for the better. And
there's some of the Royal Australian Army Nursing Corps marching with them today. They're in the maroon or the red tops as well.
Yes, the Nursing Corps, again, and today the Nursing Corps is made up of professional nurses in the main that deploy as reservists, and they've deployed all over the country and the world, in fact.
So that's the Scorpion badge there on the banner of the 3rd Cavalry Regiment Vietnam Association. The APCs, the Armoured Personnel Carriers.
Yes, they saw service in Vietnam and did sterling work. The first group that went into Vietnam was one troop of A Squadron, 419 Prince of Wales's Light Horse Regiment, and that was commanded by Captain R.K. Hill, MC. He's deceased. It was redesignated 1 APC Squadron, and they came to the relief of D Company 6 RAR at the Battle of Long Tan on the 18th of August 1966.
The Scotch College Pipe Band, established back in 1947, certainly adding tremendous colour to today's parade, the City of Perth Anzac Day Parade and commemorative service here on ABC Television. But you could join us wherever you happen to be right around this great state.
So we have the Royal Australian Artillery Association of WA, that's led by Jerry Warner, Brigadier, AM LVO, past Representative Colonel Commandant of the Royal Australian Artillery and distinguished military career, including Commander of 5MD. Vietnam Veterans Association. As we know, we served in Vietnam from 1962 through to, in fact, that's correct, 1973. A lot of us think that the last troops came out in December 1972, when in fact the last infantry officer to leave Vietnam was in April 1973, and that was the young Lieutenant Bill Forbes.
Coming up now, we can see the Royal Australian Engineers Contingent, Ex-Servicemen's Association, led today by Captain Ian Johnston, President of the RE Association, and Colonel Jeff Simpson, OAM RFD, Colonel Commandant of the Western Region. So the sappers of the Royal Australian Engineers have served in every conflict since the Boer War, providing support to other corps of the Australian Army. Along with their warfighting capabilities, they're also known for providing civil assistance tasks.
And when you see the banner there for 1 Field Squadron, Tunnel Rats, their claim to fame, and rightly so, is Tunnel Rats in Vietnam. It's a job I would not like to have done whatsoever. Close, confined spaces, very dark. The enemy could have been inches in front of your face. The RA6 Association, Bob Coventry is the president and leading that group today. And, I see Teresa Boylan down there marching.
So there's the banner showing both the First and Second World War heritage honours on the banner of the 11th Battalion, the 2nd 11th as well. The brown over blue with the A representing Anzac. They were the Gallipoli landers on that first morning at Anzac Cove, and they share a banner with the 2nd 11th as well. Arthur Leggett, who many of you would have seen as part of the Len Hall tribute match for the Fremantle Dockers the other day, he was a part of the 2nd 11th Battalion there. recited the ode and did a magnificent job, the 103-year-old.
Next up, we can see the 2nd 16th Battalion Association today, led by the Honourable Bill Graydon. Bill served as a captain on the Commando Trail during the Second World War. 2nd 16th Battalion, obviously known for its service during the Syrian campaign against the Vichy French, and later during the Commando Trail campaign in New Guinea in 1942.
And we see a chap there in his baseball cap, proudly wearing relatives medals on the right-hand side, and you can see service there for Africa, and the medal on the end is the Greek campaign medal, so more than likely a 2nd 11 chap.
2nd 16th Battalion.
Yes, they certainly did the hard yards in New Guinea. As you can see, Kokoda Track, Gona, Ramu Valley and Shaggy Ridge. I saw a photo of Shaggy Ridge again the other day. I had a relative that fought in the 2nd 16, and it was literally up to a pinpoint. The track was literally 1 man wide, and it was extremely difficult fighting in those conditions.
William Graydon, of course, AM, member of the Order of Australia, the former WA an Australian politician, was a part of the 2nd 16th Battalion who fought in Syria and Kokoda. Swan Regiment drums and pipes, raised in 2002 thanks to the donation of 21 drums by the members of the 2nd 28th Battalion and the 24th Anti-Tank Company Association.
The 2nd 28th Battalion and 2nd 24th Anti-Tank Company service in the Middle East and again in Borneo. They got battle honours of Tobruk, El Alamein, New Guinea and Borneo. And we've got John Campbell Pope, passed away in September last year at the age of 103.
Worth mentioning again for people that the T that you see stands for Tobruk. It's a special honour for those involved in the famous siege, the successful defence against Rommel's Africa Corps. Australia served there from July 1941 to December 1941. You see an example of it there.
Yeah, exactly right. Now we can see the 2nd 43rd Battalion. It's worth mentioning this is the first time that no veterans of the 2nd 32nd have actually marched in this year's Anzac Day Parade.
And it's led by Barry Marr, Lynette Starcevich, the daughter of Tom Starcevich, VC, and the flag banner holders today are Rod Marr and Patrick Marr, son and grandson.
And Tom Starcevich's Victoria Cross, one of 4 Victoria Crosses worth mentioning in the collection at the Army Museum in WA.
Yes, the Army Museum's closed today, but it's open pretty much every other day between 10 and 4:30. Check their website for entry conditions in these COVID times. There we have, well, we just saw the 2nd, 3rd machine gunners. They were in Syria in the Middle East and were sent home to defend Australia and redirected to Java. And unfortunately, they went in became POWs and spent the rest of the war in hellish conditions.
Thanks then to the Presbyterian Ladies College Pipe Band, celebrating their 41st anniversary. The dais there, seeing the Lord Mayor, Basil Zemplis.
And we have the Royal Australian Regiment Association's battalions number 1 through to 9. And man, have they done some good work over the years. They were formed in Japan, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd battalions out of the Bekoff units, and they were the 65th, 66th and 67th Australian Infantry Battalions. And they've fought in all locations: Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, Somalia, East Timor, Iraq, Solomons, Afghanistan. And
some of the great banners as well here, of course, you will see, and we've missed them in recent years. The 5th RAR, the Tiger Battalion, of course, the Grey Eights as they're known. There's the Pig Battalion coming up as well. They are spectacular, the banners as we see them. Duty first, there is the Tiger banner we spoke of for the 5th Battalion.
Yes, and in the 5th Battalion today we've got, I think it's Ian McNulty, DCM, carrying a photo of all those members that have been killed in action from Vietnam through to Afghanistan.
There's a youngster wearing the medals of a family member on the right side of his chest.
Yes, we can see that there for Afghanistan. So, yeah, proudly wearing medals of a family member. And we can see there's Vietnam medals there. And we can get into 8 RAR and then 9 Battalion at the rear. And there's a proud son or relative wearing a relative's medals on the right-hand side again.
Yeah, the Grey 8, the 8th Battalion. Former Governor and Governor-General of Australia, Michael Jeffrey, was a company commander in the 8th Battalion. Good crowd has turned up. Many people were advised to stay away if their family members weren't going to be a part of the day. But nevertheless, they've turned out in good numbers today in the first of the Anzac Day marches following the cancellations due to COVID of 2020 and 2021.
Following on from the Royal Australian Regiment, we now have the Australian Commando Association. These are the servicemen that served mainly in the Second World War in the Pacific Islands. I can see some colour patches there on the banner, the double reds of Timor being indicated there on the second from the left. That unit did some incredible work during the Timor campaign. And yes, fledged the Australian Special Forces as we know it today.
Double diamonds, the second.
And there we have a commando wearing his green beret with distinctive commando badge. Z-Force. Unfortunately, there's not a lot known about Z-Force. Their records were destroyed after the war by command because they didn't want, or some people in high office didn't want the information to be published.
They were the forebears, though, of
the Special Air Service Regiment. And today, C Squadron Rhodesian SAS is marching with them as well. Their president is Les Suster. Unfortunately, the SAS family has lost a number of members this year. Lefty Krikorian, Bob Nugent, Al Rosa, and most recently Johnny Rob Robinson, DCM, who had served in 1 squadron for Borneo and 2 tours in Vietnam. And only on Saturday, they lost Alan Jumble Jones. He was a chook with the SAS regiment and had served in Borneo and Vietnam.
We saw before the Australian SAS with their distinctive sandy berets and the wing dagger and their motto, "Who dares wins."
We can see now the 161st Independent Reconnaissance Flight Association, raised in 1965, serving in South Vietnam until its withdrawal in 1971.
And we're back to some World War II banners here, the 2nd 7th Field Ambulance, and we can see there a lot of work in Egypt, Greece and Crete against airborne forces of the Germans before going to the islands. The RAOC Association is coming into sight there. They call themselves cockroaches. I don't know why. I've never found out, but basically at the end of the day, they supply all the needs of the frontline soldier. So for every man in the front, they say there's about 10 behind doing all the administrative work and keeping them supplied, and that is the RAOC. Ramey, if we need something fixed, they fix it. Vehicles, communications equipment, you name it, we don't operate without members of the Ramey. And today they're led by Major Perry Boer. He enlisted in the Army Reserves and served with 13 Brigade. And the banner bearers are members of 113 Workshop Field Company.
Nicknamed the Spanners, established in 1942, and as Steve said, responsible for the repair and the recovery of equipment operated by the Army, including aircraft and watercraft. The Pay Corps.
Oh, every man loves a paycheck.
One of the smallest corps in the Australian Army, established in 1914, but understandably has been in service with every theatre of war and operation the Australian Army has participated in since 1914.
And looks like that's a Service Corps badge from memory, and that accompanied Service Corps was the forerunner to transport and such before it was they were split up. And again, they supplied a lot of the needs. And the distinctive Kiwi headdress, the lemon squeezer, on camera at the moment.
New Zealand ex-service men and women marching today here in the city of Perth. And behind them, the Military Police Association of Australia. They've distinctive red berets that they wear. Their official history named the other enemy, which was always an interesting way to describe yourselves. Yeah,
well, Lieutenant Colonel Sean O'Connell is leading the group today, and he looks like he's part of the enemy as well. Look at that face. But they're on the battlefield. The military police provide commanders with essential elements of mobility and manoeuvre, route reconnaissance, route signing, controlling and monitoring traffic, etc. And the last one I love is controlling military stragglers. Not that anybody would be straggling.
Start of the Air Force section of the march, you can see there as well. Before them, that's the Red Cross Association, proud to be represented at the Anzac Day Parade again and carry on the legacy of those members and volunteers who began the organisation in this nation over 100 years ago after the outbreak of World War I.
And they are always looking for blood donations, trust me. I give regularly. Bomber Command veterans. This is interesting. Where we go. There's a lady wearing her relatives' medals on the right-hand side, proudly representing their service. Nearly 60% of all aircrew in Bomber Command became casualties. That's 55,000 killed over Europe. Australia we had contributed around 10,000 aircrew, and over 4,000 of those did not return home. 80 years ago, we got an anniversary here. The famous Lancaster bomber entered service in February 1942 and flew its first operational mission in March same year. 7,377 Lancasters were built. That's 27 every week. And behind them, I think we missed him, but Mr. Peter Munro was in his motorised wheelchair. Peter's 97 in a few weeks. He flew in Sunderland flying boat aircraft in 10 Squadron.
I think Mr. Munro might be along a little bit later in the march.
Oh, keep a lookout for him and give him a big cheer.
We will. Once again, a 7-wing Air Force Cadets Drum Corps. Adding so much noise and colour, and much needed here on the Anzac Day March through the city of Perth. Drill taking place. Very impressive. Been enjoyed by spectators that have come along, stand alongside the terrace. Australian flags being waved. Another lovely morning in Perth, and it is tremendous after 2 years due to COVID protocols of having to cancel the parade that so many people come back out once again.
There we go. There he is. Mr. Munro. Battle of the Atlantic, Australian flying boats. Well done, sir. And behind him we have the Gulf War Veterans and Peacekeepers Association of WA, and all the UN peacekeepers, participants in the First Gulf War and such, march behind that banner. And it's probably worth noting that Australia sent troops to Cambodia 30 years ago this year, and they were commanded by General Sanderson. He commanded 16,000 troops on that UN mission, and it was the largest body of troops commanded by an Australian since World War II.
The WA Police. The blue berets, of course, have a specific meaning.
Absolutely. United Nations service, the police have done many sojourns overseas on UN peacekeeping operations. We'll have groups, men in there that have done their time in the military. The police seem to attract ex-military types, and we can see that by the medals on their chest. Police rangers, teaching young people a bit of discipline, and it's good to see some diversity in there, and well done to all those young people on parade today.
And before them you would have seen the WA Police Pipe Band as well, led by Drum Major Sergeant Darren King. See the United Nations flag there, with those members wearing the blue beret who have served with the United Nations.
Department of Fire and Emergency Services, led by Gary Cope. Flag bearer today is Mick Gillum. He's been a station officer for 29 years. And they're involved in all our emergency services, the fire, sea rescue, and all of those sorts of organisations within the state. Royal Air Force veterans. We can see there's a chap who's on the right-hand side as we look at the screen. He's got Gulf War and looks like Falklands service under his belt. So these are expats that are now living in Australia. And in front of them is some more Brits. We just saw an engineer there.
Descendants of the World War II Chinese Defence Force here, the third year that they've joined the Anzac Day parades.
And we can see one there which looks like he's in an Australian uniform in the photos that lady's carrying. Chinese have had a long history in Australia, coming out working in the goldfields in WA, up in Broome, pearl diving and such. And of course, they were certainly our allies during World War II. There we go, George Gibbs, 16 Battalion, so he's a World War I chap. The Rhodesians, very healthy contingent of Rhodesians in Australia now. They fought their own guerrilla war in Rhodesia between 65 and 79 before gaining independence. And of course they contributed greatly to World War II. And in fact, Rhodesia was considered a very safe place for flyers to do their training, and a lot of people earned their wings in Rhodesia before going off to Europe.
Back in the Second World War, Rhodesia was the first nation in the world to send troops to fight alongside Great Britain at the outbreak of that World War. One of every 10 men who went there never returned home.
And we have the Sikh community there. We can see that pre-World War I, Afghanistan, China, Gallipoli, and in World War II, India supplied many, many thousands of troops. And in fact, they had the greatest casualties on Gallipoli from any nation that fought there. And it's something that's sort of gone a little bit unnoticed, I think, in our community. So, well done to the Sikhs.
And leading them, the WA Sikh Band, been part of the Anzac Day Parade since 2007.
Vietnamese Ex-Servicemen's Association. Vietnam had been at war basically since for World War II right through to 1975. So they've been defending themselves from incursions, and we helped them along with other nations between 62 and 72 before we departed. And you know, I went to Vietnam 2018, just before all this COVID business started, and the resilience of the people there still shines.
You can see a couple of the flag bearers there dressed in the traditional Arvan attire with their tiger stripe camouflage, which yeah, looks fantastic, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And even the women, you know, with their traditional dress. And I remember I was in Vietnam in '93, and to see the ladies dressed in their traditional dress at that time, it was stunning, absolutely stunning. Polish veterans. The Poles contributed significantly to World War II. Many flyers in the RAF, Polish special forces, they had their own SAS group, and of course their main aim was to liberate their country from the invaders.
There were 2 squadrons of Polish fighters flying in the Battle of Britain. They represented just 6% of the pilots involved, but they accounted for 20% of enemy aircraft downed. There were also Poles, of course, involved in Bomber Command and in Coastal Command as well.
And the Scouts, a great organisation to be a part of. I was a cub back in the day, and teaches young people some discipline and community spirit.
And the motorcycle clubs, the military brotherhood of the various motorcycle clubs on display, they do a lot of charity fundraising.
Absolutely, and the brotherhood, motorcycle brotherhood, great supporters of legacy, and they do a couple of runs per year and give their time freely, particularly on Badge Day when they shake the tin.
I think we saw them first back in 2019 for some time, and good to see them back again.
And there's a member of the Patriots, same thing. You know, they're keen ex-servicemen. They just choose to ride motorbikes, just like I do.
So that's the view as we wait for those who marched and the veterans, of course, those in the cars and the jeeps, to make their way to the Perth Concert Hall for the commemorative service, which will get underway very shortly. We'd love for you to stick around and join us for that. In the very comfortable Perth Concert Hall. It's been lovely to see so many families out today, showing plenty of passion and very vigorous waving of the national flag there. There's the flame of remembrance too, which would have been lit this morning from up in Kings Park. Plenty of onlookers will wander by and have a closer look at that amongst those just beautifully restored jeeps and vintage cars. There is the flame of remembrance. It's such an integral part of the day, Steve and Paul. It was wonderful to have it back. It seems after the last couple of years with all the COVID interruptions that we've had, slow steps towards normality, and the Anzac Day March and the commemorative service is a real part of that.
Absolutely, absolutely right there, mate. Fantastic to see. Great turnout given the day, but yeah, just those small steps back to getting back on track.
And Steve, there's a number of anniversaries that are certainly worth mentioning as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's quite a few. And one of the things that we tend to miss out on a lot is we've forgotten all about the Boer War. And 120 years ago was the end of the Boer War. And in 1901, 1902, in fact 1901, when Australia became Australia, the colonies got together, they sent troops away as Australians and not as New South Welshman, West Australians, South Australians, etc. They returned the war ended in May 1902, and those troops returned, and that was the end of our participation there. All in all, we had about 16,000 troops serve in the Boer War, and they were there as Australian colony troops and or Australians. But they estimate another 10,000 made their own way across. And we've got to remember in those days, it was certainly king and country. And if we fast forward to 1917, 105 years, we have the hellish Western Front. And 1917 was particularly bad for Australians, for casualties. We had the first battle of Bullecourt, quickly followed by the second. And then in May, we ended up near Hindenburg Line, and we held the Germans there for a while. But within that 3 weeks, we lost 7,500 Australian casualties. In June, we've seen the movie Hill 60. Now, that blast that went off was supposedly heard in London and Dublin. It was the largest blast that mankind had ever made up until that point. It knocked out quite a number. They believe that the casualties on the German side was up to 10,000. And during the construction and such of that mine that went under that hill, we lost around about 30 or thereabouts Royal Australian engineers in that task. The carnage on the Western Front continued. Battle of Mazines, 6,800 men. Then there's the Third Battle of Ypres, Menin Road, Polygon Wood, Passchendaele, just to name a few. Over a course of 8 weeks fighting, we suffered 38,000 casualties. You think about that, that's Optus Stadium at around 50%. So just imagine looking at Optus Stadium when you go to the football next and think of that, and we lost that amount of men in a number of weeks. In October 1917, the 4th Light Horse Brigade, which consisted of the 4th Light Horse Regiment and the 12th Light Horse Regiment. Oh, there's George Goldie. There we go, George. There was the charge at Beersheba, where the wells had to be taken, the water was needed, and the Australians were victorious. There is that story that the Turks were in their trenches, and as the Australians rode towards them, that they didn't lower their sights and they were shooting over the heads of the Australians. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. We did lose 31 killed and 36 wounded, but we took over 700 prisoners with that.
So let's cast our mind back. What was that Turkish sunrise like on April the 25th all those years ago? Was it wet, dry, dull, spectacular, fearful perhaps? More than a century later, the Gallipoli sunrise is remembered this morning at ceremonies right across Western Australia.
I am a poor wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan in that bright land to which I go. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie just before me. I know my way is rough and steep. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no way to go. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Scenes from the dawn service this morning at Kings Park, and images too from around the state this morning at dawn services from Kalgoorlie, Broome, Geraldton, down in Albany and in Bunbury. What's coming up a little bit later on ABC television today at 11 o'clock, we'll take you to the commemorative service concert hall, the commemorative service on Anzac Day, and then at midday, recorded earlier, but we'll bring you the Gallipoli dawn service too.
Anzac Cove is a small cove on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey. You all know that. Not so well known, if at all, are the men who landed there on April 25th, 1915. For many of them, that journey to war started at Black Boy Hill.
Fremantle, present day. Like all the Cunard queens, she's a crowd pleaser. 150,000 tonnes with 2,500 passengers leading a life of luxury. Over the next couple of days, tourists will disembark and spend, while Queen Mary II, their city within a city, dominates the port. Now see what a difference a century makes. October 1914. In London, the real Queen Mary, with the King, is at the apex of the vast and threatened British Empire. But here at Fremantle, on the fringes, everything is so much smaller. These two ships, for instance. One of them, Ascanius, requisitioned by the Australian government from the Blue Funnel Line, has a new wartime number, A11. The other, Medic, a White Star liner, is answering to A7. Medic and Ascanius are fractions of the size of QM2. They are not luxurious. They're here to load the first of the West Australians who've answered the Empire's call. Right now, those lads are training at a place called Black Boy Hill. Today, their camp in the hills east of Perth is swallowed by suburbia. Just a piece saved for memories and commemorations. Yet just days after the outbreak of war, this was a busy training and recruitment camp. As the tents were raised, so was the 11th Battalion, the first in the state. The 12th and 16th would follow because in 1914 war was the thing. It's what men did. And who at Black Boy Hill had ever heard of Gallipoli? The newspaper of the day describes recruits as a mixed bag: clerks, miners, prospectors, sleeper cutters and tradesmen, arriving in suits and dungarees, carrying shiny suitcases and swags. More than 30,000 West Australians volunteered for the Great War, and most of them started army life here at Black Boy Hill. They couldn't know, but some had only months to live. Herbert Finch, bank clerk, Fremantle, WA. Died of wounds, Gallipoli, 28th April 1915, age 30. Beresford Arbuckle, boiler attendant, Leederville, WA. Died of wounds, Gallipoli, 12th June 1915, age 22. Thomas Noakes, prospector, Bardock, WA, killed Gallipoli, 1st August 1915, age 29. Charles Glover, miner, Boulder, WA, killed France, 3rd September 1916. Harry Nagel, business manager, North Perth, WA, killed Belgium, 17th October 1917. there were many, many more, remembered by families and the nation as Anzacs. And then there's Private John Simpson Kirkpatrick. That's him, third from the left, tipping his hat. And here again, more casual in white. Kirkpatrick enlisted in the Medical Corps as John Simpson. He'd jumped ship once, which might explain the slight camouflage. During Simpson's time at Black Boy Hill, he appears to have acquired a skeleton. Later, at Gallipoli, he acquires a donkey, and together they carry the wounded to safety. Simpson was killed there in May 1915 and became legend. At the end of October, the battalion is ready to move. There's a train journey through Perth to Fremantle, where Ascanius and Medic are waiting. The South Australians are already on board. This being the First World War with different alliances from the Second, a Japanese warship is also in Fremantle. The battle cruiser Ibuki will protect Medic and Ascanius until all three can join the main convoy now steaming north from Albany. Meanwhile, the Kaiser's Emden is loose in the ocean. Off Cocos, although the more powerful Ibuki wants the job, it's HMAS Sydney that breaks away to meet the cruiser and destroy the threat. And so it happens that on the 8th of November 1914, Australians meet Germans before they meet Turks. But there's still time to play the tourist. Egypt, the pyramids. The men of the 11th swarm onto Pharaoh's tomb to pose. Singly or in groups, some smiling, others stern-faced. The result, one of the all-time happy snaps from the war. But now things will change for the worse. Black Boy Hill, Fremantle, to Egypt. You've got to hope they had some fun along the way, because these clerks and miners and prospectors and tradesmen will be among the first to make that dawn landing on the 25th of April, 1915.
What an image that was at the end, one of the more famous Australian military photos. Hello again, Clint Wilden with you as we pause before the start of the commemorative service to take place at the Perth Concert Hall in around about 50 minutes from now. Please join us for that. I'm discussing a number of the anniversaries that we're remembering. Steve Danaher a short time ago talking about some of the battles from 105 years ago, mentioning at the end there the capture of Beersheba in October 1917 by the Australian 4th Light Horse that had to charge more than 4 miles to overrun the Turkish trenches. But Steve, there's a number of major milestones too that have reached the 80-year mark.
Absolutely, Clint. We had Japan enter the war on the 7th of December 1941 when they attacked Pearl Harbor, and the comment there was, I think we've woken a sleeping giant, or words to that effect, which they certainly did. But at the same time as they were attacking Pearl Harbor, they were also invading the Malay Peninsula. In fact, one of the first victories on the Malay Peninsula was an RAAF pilot taking out some landing craft from the Japanese. Staunch resistance up until the 15th of February 1942, saw the fall of Singapore. Was one of the most significant military defeats in British and Commonwealth history. More than 20,000 Australians had served in the Malayan Campaign and the Battle of Singapore. More than 1,700 lost their lives and 1,300 were wounded in action. Some were lucky enough to get away. However, some 15,000 Australians were among the 130,000 Allied personnel who were taken POW by the enemy. More than 7,000 of those Australians would perish in captivity by the time the war was over. A few days later, on the 19th of February, saw the bombing of Darwin. Now, we had a few aircraft escape out of Singapore, numbers 12 and 13 squadrons, and they had the Lockheed Hudsons, and it's some obsolete type of aircraft as well. They'd only just arrived that morning after we managing to escape. In fact, it was Timor. And the air defences at Darwin were totally inadequate, and the RAF station at Darwin was heavily bombed. 6 RAAF personnel were killed and 9 aircraft destroyed on the ground. 242 Japanese aircraft in 2 separate raids attacked Darwin that day. And we've seen footage of it, and it was absolute carnage. Ships in Darwin's harbour was lost. The 2 airfields were destroyed or badly damaged. And it was all to ensure that Australian forces couldn't land in Timor. Now we go to March of 42, something a little bit more local to us, and that's the town of Broome. It was attacked by Japanese fighter aircraft, and at least 88 civilians and military personnel lost their lives. Interestingly, Charlie D'Antone, an Aboriginal flying boat refueler, helped 2 passengers from those planes reach the shore. It was a mother and a daughter. They swam through burning fuel and wreckage, and Charlie was later to receive what was called the Honorary Medal for Charitable Assistance from the Dutch government. That's equivalent in those days for us was the George Cross, or in today's vernacular, the Cross of Valour. And he received a certificate from the Royal Humane Society of Australia.
There's the Battle of the Coral Sea from the 4th to the 8th of May 1942, a major naval battle between the Imperial Japanese Navy and the naval and air forces of both the United States and Australia. It took place in the Pacific Theatre of World War II. The battle, historically significant as the first action in which aircraft carriers engaged each other, and the first in which the opposing ships neither sighted nor fired directly upon one another.
Yes, and depending on how it's viewed, it's a victory either way, but we take it for us. And it's down to the tonnage of shipping and such that was lost, but it was pivotal. The Japanese, and also with the Battle of Midway, they were coming down, and the plan was to attack Port Moresby as a seaborne invasion. That approach failed due to the seaborne operations, mainly by the US forces. We did contribute. Canberra and the Perth were involved in that theatre of operations, and the Australia, I think, from memory. But in July of 42, the Japanese decided they still needed to take Port Moresby, but they were going to do it over land. So they landed at Gona, and they were going to traverse the Owen Stanleys by using what became the famous Kokoda track. The 39th Militia Battalion, the battalion was made up of either very young men or very old men, because the AIF had took the flower and sent them overseas, and they put up a staunch resistance stopping the Japanese.
This is the ABC's coverage of the Anzac Day March through the city of Perth, and coming up, the commemorative service from the Perth Concert Hall. Clint Wilden with you. Great to have your company wherever you're listening around or watching around the state. Military historian Steve Danaher was the voice that you just heard then. Also with us, Paul Salpietro. Good to have Paul Salpietro with us as well from the 11th, 28th. Now these days, PTSD is part of any conversation about war and its long-term effects on the participants. But what do we really know about post-traumatic stress disorder? Who's likely or in line to be a sufferer? And what can be done to combat it?
Three men came back from war and wrote a book about resilience.
We embarked on a literature review and our own body of research. Some of those experiences started to catch up with me a little.
My interest in resilience is twofold. The first, related to ignorance.
Tim Curtis and the brothers Dan and Ben Pronk are ex-SAS. They've done their tours of Afghanistan. They're successful in life, business, consultancies, and in Dan's case, medicine as well. He's Dr. Dan, who on another channel helps one of the SAS masochists repair self-inflicted damage. Dan, Ben and Tim have written a life manual called The Resilience Shield. Resilience, the dictionary will say, it's the ability of a substance to resume its former shape after being stretched or compressed. A bit like the second Terminator. Tim Curtis goes further.
In order to be resilient, you have to confront some form of adversity, and we like that. We recognise that this construct of resilience is multifactorial. There are many components to it. It's not just being physically fit or having a close group of friends or being great at your job. It's all of those things and more. It's dynamic. We can be more or less resilient at any particular given time. And it's modifiable, that we can do things that improve our own resilience. But the definition has to have adversity in there.
We'll have a go at our own definition shortly. Meanwhile, Tim is explaining the resilience concept to a workshop of top cops in WA.
Good morning. So my first career was in uniform of the camouflage variety. I did 16 years, most of that time in the SAS Regiment.
But there's one small caveat they'd probably approve.
Four Corners, the other night, is now exposing what they're calling potential war crimes in an operating environment called Timor-Leste, or East Timor, that we went into in 1999. What I will say, and I'm hoping what you will embrace, is that context is important. And what's missing from this is context. Not defending it, but that's the missing ingredient.
Tim Curtis also says that not all veterans have physical or mental problems. They don't all come back with PTSD. He cites the experience of Dr. Dan in Afghanistan, where he lost friends he was unable to keep alive.
You'd think that would affect him profoundly, and sure it did, but Dan was still able to function at an incredibly high level for multiple rotations after that in Afghanistan. And it wasn't until he'd left the service, thinking I'll leave the trauma behind, did he realise what unquestionably were the onsets of post-traumatic stress, those signs and symptoms that as a medical doctor he knew were evidence of that.
Brother Ben's Afghanistan story is different. An armoured vehicle exploded in front of him.
What he witnessed was three very different trajectories of response. The first, people just did exactly what they were trained to do. Predictable. The second was people were a bit in a heap. They didn't respond well to that event. And the third, even the most peculiar, is some were euphoric as a result of this incident. And it got us thinking in this second dimension that we were all trained the same. We did the SAS selection course across a 3-week period. We all undertook a reinforcement cycle. We had the same weapons, the same equipment. We used the same doctrine. How could our behaviours be so different in the middle of a critical incident?
One size clearly does not fit all. Hence the book's aim, to improve resilience in the field and afterwards, and to look for opportunities in adversity rather than negative aspects. Very simply, the shield consists of several layers, including the body, mind, sleep, diet, and a social layer, the importance of a social support network. But Afghanistan is likely not to be our last battlefield.
We're not seeing too many years pass by where there isn't some conflict. It might be low level, it might be more significant. And unfortunately, given the diversity of our globe, the geographic challenges, the future challenges with food and water scarcity, ego, power and influence, all of these subversive drivers will likely require us to deploy defence personnel in complex, volatile, uncertain and ambiguous battle spaces of the future. There's a belief, and I'd probably share it to a certain extent, that we decommission our ships and aircraft better than we decommission our people. But in order to decommission it, they've got to be well commissioned, which is probably an aspect of what we do in the military that's well done. However, the off-ramp isn't so great. So it's prepare them for the battlefields of the future with a view that their plan A needs to have a separate plan A that might not be in uniform, that enables them to transition to something else in life where we don't see role and identity fusion. Our research in the professional layer of the Resilient Shield indicates that where there's no air gap between what's written on your business card and who you are as a person, there's a problem. When that business card is taken away, where you lose the opportunity to be a soldier or a CEO or a professional sports person, that's when we start to see certainly mental health issues and certainly physical health issues in some of those walks of life.
It is Anzac Day 2022. The ABC's coverage of the Anzac Day March, the parade through the city of Perth and the commemorative service, which will be coming up very soon. From that venue there, the Perth Concert Hall. Join us at 11 o'clock for the commemorative service. Now though, a story about a man with a message. Not that man, if you might be checking one. This, though, is a war story. Our hero survived Afghanistan to become a role model for other men and women in his situation.
On the night of 21st June 2010, a Black Hawk helicopter crashed in Kandahar, Afghanistan. It was American, carrying Australians, Commandos. One of them, Peter Rudland, has said of that night, "The guy who was sitting in front of me, he died. The guy who was sitting behind me, he died. And the guy who was sitting in front of him, he died." Rudland himself was badly injured, but lived.
I woke up in a hospital in Germany with zero account of what had happened. I woke up and my leg was elevated, there was a big hole in my leg. I had very little arm function and no leg function for the opposite leg. So really I was just laying there and I was trying to understand. I had a frontal lobe bleed as well, so nothing really made sense to me.
Peter Rudland was bred for the military. He was adopted by his grandmother, whose husband, Peter's grandfather, had shrapnel wounds from the Second War. The shrapnel took 30 years to kill him. So Peter became a legacy kid. He'll say he was destined for the military from the day he could talk. But after Afghanistan, the Black Hawk, and a broken body, how do you possibly move on?
The processing phase of it is extremely complicated and trying to understand and take some ownership over your rehabilitation. Once I got hold of that, you know, 12 months into it, I suppose, I started to learn a lot more and really take that ownership, you know, take it away from the doctors, take it away from defence to an extent, because you've got to stand up and take, you know, ownership over your own, otherwise you'll never get better. But it's been ongoing. I've had operations for years now. I think I'll always have some degree that I'm having surgeries or something along those lines. It just is what it is. It's a part of the maintenance that is my body now.
If you ever needed evidence that Peter Rudland's body maintenance is working, look at sport. Peter discovered Invictus Games.
Invictus gives a great opportunity for people who are injured to re-engage in sport, you know, to change the way you think. And sport is a great way to, you know, to steady the ship and just sort yourself out. I went from being a member on the Invictus team, I ended up being the captain in Canada a few years ago, and then I stayed on as part of the leadership team.
And this month, he was part of the Australian team at The Hague.
Life's been great to me. I've been given every opportunity that you could possibly have. I had the best job in the world, and I've been surrounded by the best people in the world. Everything has been handed to me on a platter, and I've been smart enough to reach out and grab it.
Peter Rudland's story, with its drama and guts, is pure gold to the Australian military. The man himself may no longer fly to conflicts in a Black Hawk, but he's a role model for his generation with a powerful story to tell. Recognising this, the RSL made Peter Rudland a national ambassador. There are 150,000 RSL members across Australia. Chances are vets from the Gulf, Iraq and Afghanistan are not well represented in that membership. Why is this? What's lacking?
You know, if we get people back in the RSL, have the conversation, you know, sit around, find out what's wrong. If there's something wrong with the RSL itself, you know, fix it. And we do that by having the numbers. But if we just sit around in small groups and say this is broken, right, how does it ever get fixed? We need the numbers, we need the people, and we need to make change as it adapts to today's environment.
Is it an age thing?
So I find that a really interesting question, because that's why I sort of got into the RSL. A lot of people told me, you know, the old guys won't let go. But I don't really see it that way. You know, the more of that I speak to people across the RSL in every state of Australia, I'm finding that that's really not the case. The old guys, they're more than happy for the young guys to step up in so many cases. You'll have incidents across, you know, RSLs where some of the old guys don't want to give up. You'll have young guys who don't want to give up their positions as well. So that's just not, you know, just not the old guys. But I think it's more the young guys. We come in and we want to, you know, we step into an organisation and we have got great ideas, or we want to make change and we want to do it now. And then when it's not now, we get upset, we get disgruntled. Instead of saying, how do I become part of the organisation and how do I become the solution? You know, if it is a solution, that their idea, it will come in time. But not every idea is a good one.
Well, the very down-to-earth national ambassador from the RSL has issued his invitation. It's now up to the Rudland generation of veterans to accept and join.
What a great story that was on Peter Rudland. Clint Wilden with you on Anzac Day 2022, alongside military historian Steve Danaher, and of course also from the 11th 28, Paul Salpietro. And Steve, you know Peter personally, don't you?
Yes, look, I've known Peter since he was a wayward lad of about 14 years of age. That really gives away my age at the moment, doesn't it, after seeing images of him. But he was a Perth Modern School student and a legatee, a legacy ward, as they were called in the day. And he was given the advice one time at a legacy camp, the annual camp, by John Burridge, who was an absolute mentor of Peter. And he said to him one day, "Young man, you've got one foot in prison, or you've got an opportunity to make something of yourself and join the military. What are you going to do?" And that was the wake-up call young Peter needed at that age bracket. Once he became of age, and we'll get back to the legacy camps, and it was because of the SAS involvement there that Peter's desire was to join the SAS regiment. I bumped into Peter. In fact, we ended up doing training together in Randwick in 1993 before we deployed to Cambodia. I was posted to Sydney at the time. He was posted to, I think, the 3rd Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, and he's turned up. So here we are, the crusty old Steve and a very much younger Peter, and we served in Cambodia up until, and we actually left on the 11th of November, Armistice Day, 1993. And to see how Peter has grasped the situation that he's been put in. He should have died in that accident, no two ways about it. But as he said there was opportunity, not just for himself, but opportunity to inspire others. And I'm very proud of that young man and what he's achieved. Well done, Peter.
Paul Salpietro, the talk about the RSL and the links to those who are currently serving and those who have only just recently finished serving. Does Peter's story ring true with you from your thoughts on the RSL?
To be honest, from my perspective, probably not. I'm probably still a few years away from fully appreciating and understanding what the RSL can give.
I think what it is with the serving members is they just don't see any ex-service organisation as relevant at that time in their life because they're serving, they're not ex-serving. So I think and it took me a long time. In fact, I only joined the RSL in 2020 and I was discharged in 2001. So that's 20 years before I joined the RSL. Right. And in fact, I was retired. So I got my working life out of the way. And then I had time, I thought, to contribute. I am yet to contribute to the RSL. I will put my hand up one day. But I got involved in groups like Legacy, and I volunteer at the SAS Historical Foundation, at the collection there, on Wednesdays. So I think when you're retired, you've got time to devote to these activities, whereas otherwise, you're busy with life. And I think that's the thing, getting back to current serving personnel, it's once you leave the services that you can think about these sorts of groups.
Do you think it'll take you 19 years to get involved?
Well, I should actually qualify my comments before. I am a member of the RSL, and it is a fantastic organisation. But in terms of maintaining those links, obviously being a current serving member, the links are already there. So going back to Peter's story, it's a bit, it doesn't quite fulfil its purpose while you're still serving, in my perspective. But certainly down the track in years to come, yeah, absolutely.
Some of the scenes from here in the Perth city, here on the terrace, as we build up towards the commemorative service that will take place at 11 o'clock, so in just under half an hour's time here on ABC television. And of course, a reminder that at midday, you'll be able to see the dawn service from Gallipoli. 2 months ago, on February the 24th, Australia marked War Animals Day. It was a time to recognise the support role that animals have played in human conflicts. Think about this. Without elephants, Hannibal would still be on the wrong side of the Alps. Without camels, Lawrence would have been crisscrossing Arabia on foot. And how would have armies once upon a time communicated without pigeons? Horses, of course, were vital during the Great War, especially these beauties.
The war to end wars clearly did not end them. Later conflicts would leave thousands of damaged men and women to find their own ways of coping. One way of coping is with equine therapy. It's not new, but this big boy's story is a good example and a perfect fit for Anzac Day.
Back up, back up.
He's a whaler.
Steady now, that's okay.
His ancestors were brought to the colonies in the 19th century and bred with Australian bush horses, mainly in New South Wales, hence the name, New South Whalers. Or in his case, just cuffs, which is a small joke told by his best friend Werner.
Good boy. Good boy.
Despite the uniform, Werner is not military, but has seen years of service as a prison officer. Not all good.
2012, I was involved in a critical incident while I was working at the Greenwich Regional Prison as an officer. There was a code red called and I attended a scene. As I got there, a young female officer was knocked unconscious. Another male officer was being choked by a prisoner. Once I had helped subdue that prisoner, which rolling around on the floor and stuff, I ended up with some cuts and abrasions on my wrists, so I had to go to hospital. I had to then go through the 9 to 12 months of AIDS testing, Hep C testing. We're not allowed to know if the prisoners do have any communicable diseases or anything, and it's quite a stressful time.
You could say that Werner Holmes and cuffs are a partnership based on need. You could say that Werner is the more needy.
I think it's calming me more than it's calming him.
At this stage, best introduce a little history to reinforce the whaler's place on Anzac Day. The whaler was the backbone of Australian mounted forces. It was especially suited to the deserts of Sinai and Palestine. Whalers were colonials, like the men who rode them.
They were quite short, stout, very nimble, very pleasant horses, as in their nature, but they were very hardy. Could go long distances with little or no water.
Step down. Steady, 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 steady.
Good boy. They were their soldier's best friend.
That's better. Good boy.
You looked after them first, and you came second, because at the end of the day, if you didn't have a horse, you really didn't exist.
As it happens, Phil Dennis's horse Indy is 4 years retired from the racetrack. Indy is not a whaler. Australia sent 130,000 horses like Indy and Cuffs to the First War battlefields. It's one of those depressing statistics most people would rather not know, that of the 130,000 sent, only one, yes, just one, was allowed to come home. The Greenwich riverbed is hot this morning. Sinai hot, Palestine dry. So why is everyone dressed for a snowstorm? Werner and Phil are in fact wearing thick uniforms from the Great War. They're members of the Pinjarra-Kelmscott 10th Light Horse Memorial Troop. They travel the state with their horses to schools, shows and commemorations to honour the many battle achievements of their namesake regiment. These days the troop has more to offer. One of them came back from Vietnam with PTSD. Then, 20 years ago, he got involved with a horse. Phil tells the story.
He felt that calmed him down, and it was a good soulmate for him. He's someone he could talk to who wouldn't answer back and just accepted what he had to say. So horses became a big part of his life. Whether you just come out to brush them or just be with them or you actually ride them, it's just good for the soul.
Phil says the troop now has 2 more Vietnam vets and several other members with various forms of PTSD who are helped by the close contact with horses. Equine therapy. It sounds a bit clinical for something that's good for the soul. So, last words to Verna about her life-changing bond with a whaler called Cuffs.
He knows me better than I know myself. He knows when I'm really low and he'll come in and give me a nudge, or if I'm really stressed, he'll just say, "Go away, Mum. I want nothing to do with you." He's my life, he's my saviour. Yep, I love him to death.
You can't get a better recommendation than that.
A lovely story. Beautiful day here in Perth. There are some showers expected a little bit later on, but they've held off for the moment, and most importantly, held off for the march down the terrace. Commemorative service about 20 minutes away. We'll go there at 11 o'clock from the streets of Perth in the city to the Perth Concert Hall. You see there the Jeeps, the vintage Jeeps, beautifully restored, just parked alongside the entrance to the concert hall. Last year, we played the theme music from the film 1917 under our Dawn Service compilation. For 2022, we decided we would go back to the same film. The difference being this year's piece is not from the original 1917 soundtrack. Meet Harrison Ion.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan in that bright land to which I go. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie just before me. I know my way is rough and steep. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no way to go. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
That was the wonderful voice of Harrison Ion. Talking about anniversaries a little earlier, one of the most important was covered by the ABC some years ago. The Great Fleet leaving Albany for the Great War.
All legends have a beginning. 100 years ago, young men and women of two young nations went to war at Gallipoli. Many would not return. For them, this rugged coast edging the Southern Ocean would be the last they'd ever see of home. This is Albany, on the far southwest coast of Australia. And it was the people of this remote town who would farewell our first volunteers, exactly 100 years ago today. In August 1914, Australia and New Zealand entered the war to defend the Empire. Farm boys, labourers, miners and bank clerks, the bravest, the fittest, the larrikins even, are the first to join up for king and empire and adventure, or for no real reason they can give their mothers. Training camps were set up. In New Zealand and all the Australian states, steamships were chartered to load the volunteers, 30,000 of them, and horses. It was the greatest armada ever assembled in Australian waters. And in October, they were ordered to meet in Albany. In the spring of 1914, Albany was a respectable country town. English in so many ways, except for the way it said its name. The Albany area has history as a Noongar Aboriginal homeland. The first Europeans used it as a refuge and base while hunting whales in the Southern Ocean. In 1826, it was the first British settlement in what was then New Holland. The flag raised here would strengthen Britain's claim and warn off the French. And Albany has an anchorage to match any in the world. King George Sound and Princess Royal Harbour are vast, sheltered and remote, perfect for a gathering of ships on their way to war. And so, by late October, 38 transports were at anchor in the Sound, guarded by the Australian cruisers Sydney and Melbourne, and the British cruiser Minotaur. When Ibuki, a cruiser from Japan, steamed off to Fremantle, everyone knew departure was imminent. The ships took on water, coal and provisions. The troops marched through the town, and the worst gale for years delayed everything. Eventually, on the morning of November 1st, 1914, the Great Fleet set sail, joined off Fremantle by Ibuki, and 2 more transports with the West Australians and South Australians on board. Six months later, under murderous fire on a narrow Turkish beach, the farm boys, the labourers, the miners, and the bank clerks won a new collective name: Anzacs. And the young men of Australia and New Zealand have taken it to war ever since. All legends have a beginning. The best of them have no end.
Here is the second part about our story of the Albany departure. We just call it Jack's story.
It was the worst of times. Young men looking for adventure in a world at war. The Great Fleet had left the south coast to cross the Indian Ocean, detouring briefly to destroy the German raider Emden at Cocos. It was November. From Colombo to Egypt, where they trained one last time. At Giza, they posed on a tomb. In Alexandria, they shopped the souks and had fun. It was January, which became February, then March. The next month, the generals sent them to Turkey, where so many died because the Turks were waiting. It was April 25th, the first Anzac Day. These colonial trailblazers were followed by many others, some of whom would die fighting Turks at Lone Pine or Germans on the Western Front. By war's end, the living came home, not saying very much. But war is much more than history books. War is about real people with names and stories. Like John Morton Plain, who lived here, 188 Serpentine Road, Albany, with his father Charles and siblings. This is the only surviving photo of John Plain, known to everyone as Jack. On the 5th of October 1914, Jack joined up. He was 31, unmarried, a civil engineer lately working on the Trans-Australia Line. He was, the Army noted, a good rider. Jack trained with the 10th Light Horse at Black Boy Hill in Perth. Another engineer, Jeff Drake Brockman, his best mate, trained with him. Theirs would be a friendship for life. That is to say, for as long as they lived, because this was a time of shortened lives and short friendships. It was also a time for letters, those eyewitness descriptions of great and mundane events.
We marched through Perth yesterday and just at the present moment are being entertained by a party of musical ladies and men of Claremont. The one with the spotted dress sings nicely, but the one with the yellow band round her hat, who came in late and has not sung yet, is a peach.
So it was that letters were sent to and from this Albany house. Father to sons Jack and Alf, who went to war, brothers to sister Helen, Jeff Drake Brockman to his mate's family, and for the shortest time, Jack to his dad.
We've had a remarkably smooth and cool trip, and men and horses are well. We have a list of subjects that are prohibited by the censor, and it leaves little that we may write about. There is a picket on duty in Cairo, always of our own soldiers, whose duty it is, among other things, to turn all soldiers out of town by 10 o'clock. And as Cairo, like other towns in Europe, only begins to liven up at about midnight, we haven't seen the gayest part of it. I expect you saw the cable I sent yesterday to say that Jack had gone away to the Dardanelles. We've shifted our camp several times and are now on the beach. The sea bathing is pleasant, and the Turkish snipers add a zest to it. I would not have liked his job overmuch, for to set out when he did amongst the infantry in a storm of lead was a task that required a great deal of guts to tackle. But I wish you to remember that he died facing what any man should be proud to die facing. For to get up out of a trench amidst an awful hail of shrapnel and bullets takes all the courage any man can sum up, to say nothing of the 100-yard sprint through hell afterwards.
Despite letters reporting that Jack's body was found in a trench, his family says it was never recovered. There is a marker at Lone Pine. Drake Brockman survived Gallipoli and the Western Front. He came home and wrote a book in which he talks about his mate, John Morton Plain. So often from the beach, Plain and I, marvelling, had watched the sun set in glory behind Samothrace. I remember him as a shy, blue-eyed fellow with almost a hesitation in his speech. My son's second name is Morton. It was the worst of times, but it brought out the best.
Then we move from Albany to Darwin, a little story. Like most small town things, a community effort goes a long way. The Darwin Combined Churches organises the Anzac Day service with support from the Darwin Shire. A local student raises and lowers the flag. Another student leader lays a wreath. Darwin doesn't have an RSL anymore, but a wreath is made by volunteers and laid by a local veteran. The Shire funds the breakfast, but it's cooked by another group of volunteers to be ready as soon as the service is over. People come out of the woodwork to do the same job year in and year out. On the Darwin War Memorial, there is one name, that of Reg Reid. He served in the Korean War, the only representative of that conflict named there. He served in the New Zealand Army and was awarded the Military Medal for gallantry. He was too young to serve in World War II, but joined the British Commonwealth Occupation Forces in Japan. And after discharge, he went to New Zealand seeking greener pastures. A life in banking, I understand. There he joined the New Zealand Artillery when the Korean War broke out, because he had more to give. Reg was to spend 16 months in Korea, a very long tour of duty. During November 1951, when heavy enemy attacks meant the lines between the guns and the battery commander's headquarters were being continually knocked out, Sergeant Reg Reid was out there maintaining the lines regardless of his own personal safety, inspiring the men under his command and those around him to do their best. Later, when the headquarters needed to withdraw, Reg was there organising the communication lines once more. In April 52, Reg's unit came under further heavy shelling. He was out there again. The citation says that the speedy and accurate return artillery fire that broke up what would have been a dangerous attack was in no small measure due to his valuable work. Sadly, Sergeant Reg Reid was killed on the 2nd of May 1953 at the age of 27. And he is buried in the UN cemetery at Pusan. His headstone bears the New Zealand fern, of course. However, I'm sure that if you look hard, and get the lighting just right. That particular fern looks a little like a Darwin rose. We'll be crossing to Clint Wheeland in the concert hall.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's service is about to commence. If you are able, would you please stand for the arrival of the Governor? Ladies and gentlemen, the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, Governor of Western Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Good morning, I'm Clint Wheeland. It is an honour to be your Master of Ceremonies for this morning. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. On behalf of the State President of RSLWA, Mr Duncan Anderson, I extend a special welcome to you here today, and I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, Governor of Western Australia, the Honourable Senator Linda Reynolds, CSC, representing the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison, MP, the Honourable Paul Papalier, CSC, MLA, Minister for Police, Road Safety, Defence Industry and Veterans Issues, representing the Premier of Western Australia, the Honourable Mark McGowan, MLA, WA Commissioner of Police, Chris Dawson, the Lord Mayor of the City of Perth, Basil Zemplis, Mr John McCourt, JP, Chief Executive Officer, RSLWA, our senior Australian Defence Force officers in WA, members of the clergy, members of the Consular Corps, all veterans who have served and are still serving, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome also to the thousands of people across WA who are watching on ABC television. It is now my pleasure to invite the State President of RSLWA, Mr Duncan Anderson, to the lectern.
Good morning. As the nation pauses to reflect and remember, I have the immense honour of making the opening remarks for today's commemorative service. The word veteran. It's a word that conjures images, thoughts and emotions. These are incredibly personal, drawn from one's background and perspective of the world. We should see the term veteran as one that unifies, a term that transcends the generations, transcends politics and those incredibly important issues that make up everyday conversations. The veteran community is so incredibly diverse, and I'm certain it has positively impacted each of you here today, most likely without you even knowing it. Veterans have formed part of the Australian community since Federation. I am forever and will be a proud veteran. Recent events in Afghanistan have drawn attention to a group of younger veterans that have served our nation. There is no doubt that this conflict touched many of us in many different ways. However, these young men and women are not the only veterans in our community we honour today. A few tales. A young man whose sister's husband had completed several tours with the Special Air Service Regiment in Vietnam. This young man was emboldened to join the Army. Having completed basic training, he undertook selection. Qualified, he became part of a small group of soldiers that pioneered Australia's counter-terrorism capability. Having succumbed to back, knee and shoulder injuries, he was medically discharged after just 4 years of service. Another young man that enlisted into the Royal Military College and was posted to his unit. A keen young man that embraced all facets of military service as a young officer. Smart, fit, fair and incredibly well regarded. He was selected and deployed and on his second tour to Afghanistan, this young officer was killed in action on the 29th of October 2011 by a rogue Afghan soldier. Finally, an incredibly smart man, a rocket scientist in fact, completed his training at the Royal Military College. Always the smartest man in the room. He served on operations in Solomon Islands, Iraq and Afghanistan. This young man succumbed to his own internal demons and tragically took his own life. These are my stories. The first is my father. The second, Captain Bryce Duffy, who was a young officer of mine when we were posted to Brisbane together. The third is an army officer, a mate, who I knew very well, having served together in the same unit and completed many, many awful courses at Puckapunyal. Consider these tales, although my tales from the recent past, could these tales be applied to any generation, any service, any context? However, the reason I tell you these tales is to draw out two factors that I hope will colour your view of veterans from this point forward. Firstly, our veteran community transcends generations. Simply because a veteran served overseas does not make them any more important than those that did not. So then, what unifies the most battle-hardened Special Air Service operator in Afghanistan to a young Air Force technician here in Australia? What unifies those soldiers, sailors and airmen who served in periods of total war to those who make up our reserve force? That same reserve force you see on your television supporting our community in our response to COVID, in our response to bushfires and other natural disasters. The unifying theme that transcends generations is one of service, a willingness to sacrifice personal comforts, health or even your life in service of your nation. To serve is an incredible privilege. To wear the Australian national flag on your uniform will always be so special to me and I'm sure many others. Secondly, the act of service will impact all veterans in very different ways. Some veterans will transition with ease from service to life in our community. Others will struggle with physical, mental and social challenges, never fully leaving the military. This is not a new phenomenon, with some servicemen and women succeeding, some not, after their period of service. In conclusion, Winston Churchill once said, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see." It is our collective responsibility to not be blinded by our recent past, but look back over the generations and recognise all forms of service from all veterans. It is our responsibility to help our mates, their families, and help them thrive in our community. To serve those that have served us, lest we forget.
Thank you, Mr Anderson. Duncan Anderson there, the State President of RSLWA. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand and join the RSLWA Chaplain Barry Jesberg for our first prayer for the Australian Defence Force, followed by the prayer for the leaders of the nation.
Let's pray for the Australian Defence Force. Eternal God, source of peace, we pray for all who serve in the Australian Defence Force. Give them courage and comfort in danger, patience in waiting, and discipline in the just use of force. Help us to seek for all people the freedom to serve you and each other in compassion and peace. Amen. So we pray for the leaders of the nations. Lord our God, source of all wisdom and goodness, guide the leaders of our nation and those of the other world nations to judge wisely, rule fairly, and make decisions for the good of all people. May they lead their country in the way of justice and peace and promote harmony throughout the world. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Jesberg. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. I now have the pleasure of introducing the Anzac Day Service Choir. Please join them in the singing of Lest We Forget. Thank you very much. It is now my great pleasure to introduce the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, Governor of Western Australia, to deliver his Anzac Day address.
Can I start, as we always do, in any engagement I have, by acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, on whose traditional lands we are now assembled, and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Can I acknowledge here too Senator the Honourable Linda Reynolds, who is representing the Prime Minister, the Honourable Paul Papalia, CSC MLA, who is representing the Premier, the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor of Perth, Basil Zemplis, the Commissioner of the WA Police Force, Chris Dawson, APM, Commodore Ivan Ingham, AM, WA Senior Defence Officer, Captain Gary Lawton, Commanding Officer of HMAS Stirling, Brigadier Brett Challoner, CSC, Commander of the 13th Brigade, Wing Commander Paul Taylor, Commanding Officer of Number 25 Squadron, Duncan Anderson, the President of the RSL, and John McCourt, who's the RSL CEO, and Mr. Peter King, who is of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Distinguished guests all. Well, it's an honour and a privilege to provide this final Anzac Day address as your Governor. Anzac Day is more than a rightfully appropriate time to reflect on lives lost and lives ruined in the tragedy of armed conflict. It is also a day to honour the lives of so many Australians who entered the baptism of fire on the Gallipoli Peninsula on the 25th of April 1915. That is a date etched in Australia's history. It is regarded by many, including myself, as Australia's most important national day. While the Gallipoli campaign was seen as a baptism of fire, it was also seen at the time as the birth of our nationhood. On that morning in 1915, Australian troops knew they made a landing on hostile soil. Yet the campaign saw characteristics displayed by Australian and New Zealand troops that endured in later wars and conflicts and in other crises and hardships. The troops displayed great courage, endurance, initiative, discipline and mateship, qualities that came to be seen as the Anzac spirit. This did not escape the attention of one of Australia's most respected military leaders, Sir John Monash, who had cut his teeth in command on Gallipoli. He said of his men in France during the First World War that there was a uniqueness that was misunderstood by other Allied commanders. Monash observed that the Australian soldier was, quote, a curious blend of a capacity for independent judgment with a readiness to submit to self-effacement in a common cause. He had a personal dignity of his own, unquote, and certainly understood the politics of war. Indeed, Monash was so annoyed at the opinion of his troops by British generals that he said, and I quote, very much and very stupid comment has been made upon the discipline of the Australian soldier. That is because the very conception and purpose of discipline have been misunderstood. It is, after all, a means to an end, and that end is the power to secure coordinated action amongst a large number of individuals for the achievement of a definitive purpose. It does not mean lip service nor obsequious homage to supervisors, nor servile observance of forms and customs, nor a suppression of individuality. Mates helping mates. When the chips are down is in our DNA, and that has built an Australia we can all be proud of. Recently, both the Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Federal Opposition Leader Anthony Albanese attended the Australian War Memorial to mark the opening of Federal Parliament in 2022. The subject of their speeches, delivered during the last post ceremony, was a reflection on the life and death of West Australian Victoria Cross recipient Percy Gratwick. His selfless courage is instructive for what the Anzac spirit means to so many. Private Percy Gratwick was born in Katanning in 1902 and was well into his 30s as World War II approached. A resourceful character, he was a leader of men, building up a droving business in the northwest. When he first tried to join the AIF, he was knocked back. Why? Because he had a broken nose. Now, that was a common affliction in Australia at that time. Having had it fixed at considerable expense to himself, he was finally accepted in December 1940. After training in September 1941, he joined the 2nd 48th Battalion in that month that was under siege at Tobruk. It was there that circumstances conspired to see his courage under fire that earned him the Victoria Cross during the Second Battle of El Alamein. In an attack on Materia Ridge, Gratwick's company suffered heavy casualties and was held up by intense enemy fire. His platoon lost its commander, its sergeant, and most of the men. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, Gratwick launched a single-handed attack with grenades, rifle and bayonet on the German posts. He finally fell to a burst of machine gun fire, but while mortally wounded, he was still able to hurl a grenade that silenced the enemy. His lone efforts had a huge impact on his mates, inspiring the remaining soldiers to advance and capture the ground that the Germans had occupied. As he'd done all his adult life, Gratwick asked no one what to do. He had always measured people by their actions, not their words, and he lived and died by that belief. A framed portrait of him is proudly displayed among the other West Australian VC recipients in the Victoria Cross room in Anzac House across the way. As Anzac Day grew to be more than a reflection of bloody conflict, there was and still is a continued reminder that wars and conflicts have more casualties than those who fought. It also includes the innocent victims on all sides, the families, the children, and the lost opportunity to live a peaceful life. Of Anzac Day, noted wartime Prime Minister John Curtin once opined that the day was not an observance of sacrifice to the god of war, but to the fair god of peace, and that the reason the veterans came together was for memories of pals who had died. So what do we make of Anzac Day? When we gather to remember, we fulfil a promise our foreparents made to those brave souls who fought to defend our nation when it was under direct attack. 80 years ago, in fact, in our year of living dangerously, we mobilised and fought in brutal combat in the Battle of the Coral Sea and on the Kokoda Track, and during that period our city of Broome was bombed. Of course, that's focused on the Kokoda Track. We're also fighting the Battle of El Alamein, the 9th Division at least, while all that was proceeding. This was a time of great peril where we fought for our very survival. And before the involvement of our American allies was fully engaged, there's a hiatus. We defended ourselves valiantly, but not without great loss and sacrifice. In that war, our society took total ownership of Anzac Day. Our society was the most mobilised of all belligerents. Women were in all branches of the armed services, and they were critical in war industries. About the Anzac legend, there was a certain amount of identification of masculine characteristics, and so there should have been, because those masculine characteristics came to represent us. But they weren't the only features of the Second World War. We were heavily dependent on what women did. And finally, we had to demobilise a division, I think towards 1944, to the fury of Douglas MacArthur, because war production had run out of women. Now, since that time, our nation has enjoyed relative peace and security. But it is vitally important that we keep alive the memory of the price that was paid for our freedom. Year by year, numbers continue to grow for Anzac Day services and commemorations, many who come are children. A classic example of this is the annual observance of what Anzac Day means by young students at Rosalie Primary School in Shenton Park. Each year, the school observes a special Rosalie Remembers service with the strong support of the parents. This year, they focused, as I did earlier, on 80 years since the Kokoda battles in Papua New Guinea. RSLWA has also heard from other parents who say Anzac Day not only commemorates sacrifice, it also depicts mateship at its finest. For their own children, they felt Anzac Day opens their eyes to see how people can work together in sometimes dire circumstances. It demonstrated that even though something horrible was happening, by working together we were able to get through. While children hear about war, hear about conflict, hear about death, there is the view that Anzac Day gives parents the opportunity to talk openly to their children and help them process, understand and appreciate what has come before, what is happening in other parts of the world, and for the society that we are lucky enough to live in. We are indeed a lucky country, but luck is not enough to keep us safe. We can take nothing for granted. We are moving into a political environment in our region where luck has little to do with the prospects for survival. We need to deeply understand the terms and conditions of our survival. Here in the beauty and tranquility of Perth, the horrors of 80 years ago can seem far away and long ago. It is precisely for this reason that we must remember. When we gather here, year after year, we recall a harsh reality, and that is that peace is maintained through strength. Weakness augments the possibility of aggression. And this further point is not often thought of. It also diminishes the capacity of our diplomats to influence our region in the direction of peace and prosperity. We are learning at this moment the cost of deterrence effectively elsewhere. We are also learning how inadequate we can be for the first phase of war. Already, for the example, the United States has drawn down 1/3 of its supply of javelins. That's about 3 or 4 weeks fighting on a very small front in Ukraine, has reduced the US armoury by 1/3 of one of its most capable land fighting weapons. And as I said, a battle on a very small front. We speak with pride about achieving a goal of 2% of GDP spent on defence. Remember when we were fighting for our survival, in our year of living dangerously, 34% of our GDP was spent on defence. This year, defence spending reaches almost 50 billion. But that statistic would be well north of 500 billion. When we are asked to calculate the cost of freedom and the value of the sacrifice being made in our name, we do need to think about that and think about it very carefully as we enter into a period where what I used to, when I was Defence Minister, think of warning time, has completely disappeared. So I am reminded of the words from RSLWA, that the price of freedom, the price of liberty, is eternal vigilance. Well, lest we forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. The Honourable Kim Beazley AC, Governor of Western Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you to please stand for the prayer for those who have suffered through war, delivered by Chaplain Jesberg.
For those who suffer through war. O God our Father, we bring to you in our prayers on this Anzac Day those who still suffer the results from war and their service, and that you'll bring to them healing, mercy and peace. Strengthen all who seek to help them in their time of need. We remember, pray for and are grateful for their families who support these folk in their time of life and death. We ask that they may know your courage and strength in this great task. Amen.
Please be seated. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Chaplain Barry Jesberg. The Anzac Day Choir will now sing In Memoriam. Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to what is the most solemn part of today's commemorative service. Will you please stand for the recital of the Ode by RSL WA State President Duncan Anderson, followed by the playing of the last post and 1 minute silence.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget. If you are able, ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and join the Anzac Day Choir in the singing of Abide With Me.
Abide with me.
Please be seated, everyone. The Anzac Day Choir will now sing My Country. Thank you again to the fantastic Anzac Day Choir. They and the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band have been wonderful this morning. In fact, can we give them another round of applause, please, everyone? Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to call on the Minister for Police, Road Safety, Defence Industry and Veterans Issues, the Honourable Paul Papalia, CSC MLA, to provide his address on behalf of the Premier, the Honourable Mark McGowan, MLA.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could I begin by extending apologies and best wishes from the Premier. He would dearly love to be here. Unfortunately, he has COVID. Can I also acknowledge the Governor, the Honourable Kim Beazley AC, veterans present here today, service men and women who are currently serving here today, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's right and proper that we gather on this day to commemorate and give thanks to the sacrifice of the Anzacs. But the sad truth is, there are no more Anzacs. There are none to hear our thanks. But if we want to honour those Anzacs in a more tangible way than perhaps just commemoration, we can look towards honouring and thanking and caring for those who inherit their legacy. There are some 88,000 men and women wearing the uniform of the Australian Defence Force right now. Every single one of them gave exactly the same commitment as the Anzacs did when they donned the uniform. That being that if necessary, they would put themselves in harm's way on behalf of the nation. Right now, as we gather here, many are far from home doing exactly that, fulfilling that pledge. In South Sudan, we have 20 personnel with the UN mission there. In Korea, with the Demilitarisation Commission, we have 3 personnel. We have 5 personnel in the Northern Arabian Gulf with the command for the multinational maritime force there. In the Sinai, with the multinational force, we have 27 personnel. And further north in Israel, monitoring the UN Truce Supervision Organisation, we have 12 personnel. We even have 2 personnel currently serving in Iraq with NATO, the NATO mission in Iraq. And there is an officer with the UN command in Mali. Beyond that, at any time, there can be as many as 600 personnel defending, supervising and guarding our maritime approaches. And of course, we have witnessed many tens of thousands of other Australians serve in combat and conflict around the world in recent times. More than 40,000 Australians served in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many tens of thousands of others served before that. In Interfet, in East Timor, in Rwanda and Somalia in peacekeeping operations, in the Gulf War, in more peacekeeping operations in the Solomon Islands and Cambodia, in the Vietnam War, in the Malayan conflict, in the Korean War, and we still have some veterans surviving, some very few veterans surviving from the Second World War. I would ask that when we leave this place today, we reach out to some of those serving men and women, to some of those veterans and their families, and yes, we give thanks to them, but we also seek to challenge ourselves to do something that makes a tangible difference to their well-being. Regardless of whether we're in government, in politics, in business, or just members in the community, all of us can do that. It's the very least we can do, and it is one of the best things we can do to honour the Anzacs, lest we forget.
Thank you, Minister. The Honourable Paul Papalier, CSC, MLA. Ladies and gentlemen, may I ask you to please be upstanding again for the prayer of remembrance delivered by Chaplain Barry Yesberg.
With the words of commemoration we've been hearing, let me pray a prayer of remembrance. Almighty God, we remember with thanksgiving those who have made the supreme sacrifice for us in a time of war, on peacekeeping duties and other operations. We pray the offering of their lives may not have been in vain. We remember and pray for their families and mates who are grieving their loss today, that they may know your support, peace and courage in this loss and grief. May your grace enable us this day to dedicate ourselves to the cause of justice, freedom and peace, giving us the wisdom and strength to build a better world for the honour and glory of your name. Amen.
Please be seated, everyone. Thank you, Chaplain. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you all agree that this has been a wonderful venue to hold this very important commemorative service, and I'd like to thank the Perth Concert Hall for their support in making us all feel so welcome again. The RSLWA would not be able to conduct Anzac Day without the support and the generosity of the community, and we would like to thank Lottery West for their generous support, the City of Perth, Transperth, our musical director, Miss Celia Christmas, and the magnificent voices from the Anzac Day Choir brought together from the Perth Modern School Chamber Choirs and the Perth Modern School Alumni Singers and the Salvation Army Perth Fortress Band. And I know I've said this before, but could I ask for another moment of applause for those who have played and sung so beautifully for us? Thank you also to the WA Police Service, St John Ambulance and Constable Care, the Department of Fire and Emergency Services and other emergency services, Rotary WA, the Salvation Army, the Anzac Day Volunteers, Rovers, Scouts, Guides, and last but most definitely not least, to our valued veterans here today and to those who were unable to be with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please be upstanding for the National Anthem of New Zealand, followed by the National Anthem of Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our service here this morning. Would you please remain standing for the departure of the Governor, followed by our other distinguished attendees.
Thanks, team. You're just wonderful. Just brilliant. Show you stuff.
Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. And thank you so much for attending this commemorative service. Thank you to our guests and to everyone who not only was here today, but to all our viewers throughout Western Australia on ABC television. Thank you for watching today. The Anzac Day Choir and the Salvation Army Fortress Band will end this service with Soldiers of the Queen. Thank you very much. If you see a veteran today, do say hello and enjoy the rest of Anzac Day 2022.
this concludes the concert hall. Many thanks to Clint Wheeldon, and very much appreciated the wonderful words from our community leaders, particularly the Governor. I'm sure most veterans take great solace in what he had to say today. This morning, of course, many people would have attended the driveway services, just like I did. And we're very fortunate where I am. We have a lone bugler, and we had a young ladies accompanying him whilst they sang the ode. So for those, thank you, and you know who you are, Lawrence Street, Innaloo. Though attendance numbers may be fewer than we have seen in past pre-COVID years, our physical presence is accompanied by the presence of the fallen. As you look towards the sea, there is nothing but silence. The shadowy boats are approaching the shoreline. There is no splash of oars, no sound of boots on the Gallipoli sand as the soldierly images rush towards the cliffs. No metallic sound as their rifles smash into the rocks, as the ghostly images throw themselves down, still searching for cover. No thud of rounds hitting flesh or screams as men fall facing the foe. Look about, the sight of young, strong men in uniforms, some familiar, others not so. They mingle together, no longer enemies, sharing the same soil as a place of eternal rest. Their dawn never ends, lest we forget.